On 4 separate nights across a single monitoring season, a wildlife camera mounted above a wash near Alamo Canyon, inside Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, Arizona, recorded a figure walking to within 3 feet of the lens, stopping, and standing there for several seconds before moving on, never once reaching for the unit itself. The camera is one of 61 deployed across the monument in 2022 as part of the Sonoran Desert Network's ongoing wildlife survey, a program the National Park Service has run since 2016 to track medium and large mammal activity across Sonoran Desert Park units using passively triggered, motion detection field cameras mounted at a fixed height on metal fence posts. What made this particular station's card worth pulling out of a season's worth of javelina, coyote, and bighorn sheep photographs is the repetition. The same figure, identifiable by build and clothing across all 4 appearances, approached this one station, and no other camera on the 61-unit grid recorded anything resembling it before or after. That entire season. Picture the wash at that hour. Desert dark, closing in fast after sunset this time of year, saguaro and palo verde throwing long shadows across sand still holding the day's heat. The kind of stillness that in this particular stretch of the monument doesn't always mean nothing is moving through it. This was not a park visitor checking equipment out of curiosity. Organ Pipe's field crews log every authorized approach to a monitoring station, and no technician, researcher, or ranger was scheduled anywhere near this wash on any of the 4 nights in question. It was not wildlife misread as a person. The figure's silhouette, gait, and upright posture across all 4 clips rule out any species on the monument's own confirmed mammal list. And it was not equipment tampering, since the housing, mount, and cable showed no disturbance at any retrieval. The 4 visits produced photographs and nothing else. The detail nobody on the review team has been able to explain away is the stillness itself. Every documented approach on this program's other 60 stations shows an animal or person passing through the frame, entering and leaving within seconds. This figure stopped, stood, and stayed close enough to fill most of the frame 4 separate times across one season and never once made contact with the camera it was standing in front of. Where that wash sits matters as much as what stood in front of that lens. Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument shares a 32-mile border with Mexico, and its history with that border is documented in specifics most national park units never have to record. In 2002, Park Ranger Chris Eggle, a wildlife biologist by training who had built a career studying desert ecosystems before taking on backcountry patrol duties, was shot and killed inside the monument by drug smugglers fleeing Mexican police. His death led directly to an $18 million 30-mile vehicle barrier along the international boundary, completed in the years that followed. That barrier worked in the narrow sense it was built for. Vehicle incursions dropped sharply. Foot traffic did not. More than half of the monument was closed to public access from 2003 to 2014, specifically because of ongoing safety concerns tied to cross-border smuggling routes running through its washes and canyons. When the park reopened those areas in September 2014, ranger staffing had grown from 5 to 20, and the nearby Border Patrol station's field agents had grown from 25 to more than 500. It would be easy to assume the figure in these 4 clips is simply a border crosser passing through, unremarkable in a park with this documented history. That explanation survives a single sighting. A. It does not survive 4 separate nights at the same fixed point with the same behavior repeated each time. Border traffic through this monument is documented as constant, purposeful movement toward a destination, not a repeated stop at one specific wildlife camera, and nowhere else on a 61-station grid. It would also be easy to assume this is a park employee or contractor whose visit simply wasn't logged correctly. A paperwork gap rather than anything worth a second look. Every SODN field crew visit to every station on this grid is recorded with a name, a date, and a stated purpose before the visit happens, cross-checked against the photographic timestamp during the season-end review specifically to catch exactly this kind of discrepancy. None of the 4 dates in question has a matching entry anywhere in that log, and none of the program's field staff has claimed the visits since the pattern was flagged. And it would be easy to assume 4 appearances over one season simply reflects a busy stretch of wash that any camera in that spot would have caught regardless of who or what was moving through it. The 4 nearest stations on the same randomized grid, checked against the same season's data, recorded standard wildlife traffic and nothing resembling a repeated human visit at all. This wash was not an unusually busy corridor by the survey's own numbers, which makes 4 static visits to one specific post harder to file as ordinary background noise. The monument itself covers roughly 330,000 acres of Sonoran desert, most of it federally designated wilderness with no maintained road access, patrolled by a combined force of park rangers and border patrol agents that even at its expanded 2014 staffing levels covers a fraction of that ground on any given night. This is not a park where someone would have seen carries the weight it might somewhere smaller. Understanding exactly how this camera grid operates and why one station's card drew this level of scrutiny matters before anything else about this file makes sense. The Sonoran Desert Network is a National Park Service monitoring program covering multiple park units across the Sonoran Desert and Apache Highlands, staffed by field ecologists who deploy and service camera stations as part of a standardized, long-running effort to track wildlife population trends over time. The program has run at Oregon Pipe since before this specific season, with 61 active stations in 2022 alone, each one placed according to a randomized sampling design rather than any judgment about which washes might be more or less likely to see human traffic. None of the ecologists running this grid chose Alamo Canyon for any reason beyond where the random sampling grid happened to place a point, a methodology used precisely because it removes human bias about which parts of the landscape matter most. The Alamo Canyon station was provisioned the same way as every other point on the grid, mounted at a fixed height on a metal post, motion-triggered, running on batteries checked on a set retrieval schedule with no bait, no lure, and no modification distinguishing it from the 60 other units recording wildlife across the monument that same season. Field crews rotate through station checks on a schedule set by logistics and terrain access, not by any assessment of a given wash's history. The season's first several months of data from this station looked exactly like the rest of the grid. Javelina working the wash at dusk, a bobcat passing through twice, coyotes on a fairly regular rotation, the kind of unremarkable dataset field ecologists process by the hundred without a second look. Nothing in that early data marked this station as different from any other point on the survey. The pattern wasn't caught in the field. It surfaced during the season-end review, when an analyst working through the full photo archive for quality control flagged 4 images that didn't match any species on the target list, then pulled the surrounding frames from each of those 4 nights to confirm what the camera had actually recorded before escalating it to the program's field coordinator. What that review eventually cataloged from those 4 nights amounts to its own inventory, built the way any flagged anomaly in this kind of ecological dataset gets built once someone runs the full cross-check. The visit dates themselves, spread across the monitoring season with no fixed interval connecting them, ruling out a simple recurring schedule. The figures position in frame, close enough on all 4 occasions that standard photogrammetric estimates from the housing's fixed focal length place the subject within 3 feet of the lens each time. The duration, between 6 and 11 seconds of continuous frames per visit, far longer than the sub-second wildlife passes this station otherwise recorded all season. The equipment log, housing intact, Mount undisturbed, no scratch or tool mark on the cable at any retrieval following any of the 4 dates. The cross-check against the SODN visitor log, no scheduled or unscheduled authorized visit recorded for this station on any of the 4 nights in question. And the battery and clock log for the unit itself. No drift, no unexpected drain, nothing suggesting the camera's own hardware had any part in producing what it recorded. And frames like these, a single station on a much larger survey grid producing a pattern the rest of the program's data can't account for. Surface out of long-running wildlife monitoring networks more often than most people watching this would expect. Subscribing with notifications on is the only way to know when the next one gets reviewed and released. Now, back to that wash near Alamo Canyon. No formal investigation followed because a wildlife survey program isn't equipped to pursue an unidentified individual on federal land, and nothing about the 4 visits constituted a reportable incident under the monument's own security protocols. What did follow was a check of the 4 nearest stations on the same grid, each within roughly 2 kilometers. None of them recorded anything resembling this pattern across the same season, and a follow-up field visit to the wash itself found no fixed trail, cache, or marker that would explain repeated foot traffic converging on this exact point rather than passing through it. The National Park Service's own position on backcountry safety at Oregon Pipe is a matter of public record, stated without minimizing the risk and without treating every visitor as a target. The monument's own visitor guidance is direct. Cross-border smuggling routes pass through the park. Hundreds of people move through it on foot in a given year, and visitors who observe suspicious activity are instructed to note their location and report it rather than approach. That guidance exists because the underlying activity is real and ongoing, not because the park is exaggerating a threat for effect, and it has stayed largely unchanged in substance since the partial reopening in 2014, revised periodically as the situation on the ground shifts rather than as a one-time policy update. That framework accounts for why field crews follow strict scheduling and check-in protocols in this specific part of the monument. It does not account for why one station, and only one, kept recording a figure that never appears anywhere else on the same grid. One point about this file requires complete transparency, stated exactly where it belongs, and not folded into a footnote. Field technicians who have worked camera grids in this region have described informally occasional encounters with individuals near known crossing corridors who show no interest in the equipment itself and no apparent urgency to keep moving, described by more than one tech as behavior that doesn't match either a lost hiker or a border crosser under normal conditions. That pattern has never been compiled into any published SODN report or officially confirmed by the National Park Service, and it deserves to be weighed exactly that way, as field experience shared between the small number of people who work this specific kind of terrain, not as documented finding. Attached to almost any other stretch of American wilderness, 4 static visits to one camera wouldn't survive a second look. But this monument already carried a documented history into the review. In 2002, a ranger was killed here by people moving through this exact landscape, trying not to be seen. Between 2003 and 2014, more than half the park stayed closed because that kind of movement never fully stopped. In 2017 and 2018 alone, federal prosecutors secured convictions in incidents involving hundreds of pounds of contraband seized within a few miles of washes, very much like this one, each case resolved through the ordinary federal court process rather than left open or disputed. A monument with this specific dated history of people moving through it while actively avoiding detection produces, on the rare occasion someone doesn't avoid a lens fast enough, exactly the kind of anomaly this station recorded 4 times in one season, which does not identify who the figure was, but does explain why this particular wash was already primed to produce something a routine wildlife survey was never built to interpret. That history is not confined to the past. 2. Field protocols at Organ Pipe are still built around the same underlying reality that shaped them after 2002, and stations in the highest-risk washes, including this one, are no longer left running unattended overnight without an accompanying patrol check. A policy change field staff traced directly back to the season this station's card was pulled. Set against the broader SODN program's operating history across the Sonoran Desert Network's units, this level of anomaly is genuinely rare. The program has run camera grids across multiple park units since 2016, generating hundreds of thousands of images of wildlife, with only the occasional misfired frame or equipment fault requiring a second look. A single station producing 4 confirmed, unexplained human close approaches in one season, with no matching authorization and no match on any neighboring station, sits well outside what field ecologists on this program describe as ordinary background noise in the data. Wildlife survey programs elsewhere along international borders have documented comparable anomalies inside otherwise routine datasets. Camera trap studies run near sections of the U.S.-Mexico border in South Texas have logged similar isolated stations producing unexplained human activity patterns distinct from the surrounding wildlife data, in terrain with a documented history of cross-border foot traffic. Findings researchers in those programs have noted without resolving, since identifying an unauthorized individual was never within either project's scope or authority. The architecture is the same: a legitimate ecological monitoring grid, a borderland with a real security history, and one station that ends up recording something the rest of the program was never built to explain. Nothing that follows is established as fact. It is the only account these 4 nights and the station's surrounding records actually support, and no more than that. One reading of the file places it like this: someone moving through this wash on more than one occasion, aware of the camera's presence and its fixed narrow field of view, well enough to stand directly in front of it without disturbing the mount, pausing there for reasons the footage itself gives no indication of. Then continuing on a route the camera's fixed angle was never built to follow past the edge of its own frame. The physical record doesn't move once the alternate readings are set aside. 4 visits, 1 season, 1 station, no wildlife match, no visitor log match, no equipment tampering, and a duration and proximity, nothing else, on a 61 camera grid produced that year. None of it has been reconciled with any confirmed identity, and none of it has been formally investigated beyond the internal program review that first flagged it. This channel does not claim to know who or what stood in front of that camera 4 times, and it will not pretend the National Park Service knows either. A repeated pause in front of a lens is not a confirmed identity, and an unresolved pattern is not evidence of intent. What the record shows is what the record shows, and where the record stops, this account stops with it. Files like this one, a routine ecological survey producing a pattern nobody built the program to interpret, surface out of long-running wildlife camera grids more often than most people expect, and most of them start exactly the way this one did, as a quality control pass that turned up 4 frames that didn't belong with the rest of the season. If you know of a case that belongs in this archive, the comments are usually where it starts. That station near Alamo Canyon no longer runs unattended overnight. The rest of the grid still does. The frame ends. The one post where a camera used to run alone at night doesn't run alone anymore.